I've been pondering lately the power of a name. Is a name merely something that we call ourselves, or does that which we call ourselves also describe or even define us in significant and life-shaping ways? The same question is famously posed by Juliet in Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. As you may recall, the title characters in the play are from bitterly divided families. Juliet from the Capulet family and Romeo from the Montague family. There's long-standing bad blood between the families, sort of like an Old English Hatfield and McCoy feud. But young love is young love. And the heart does as it will, and when Romeo and Juliet meet at a party, they are instantly and irresistibly drawn to each other. As Juliet considers that her new love is of the hated Montague family, she muses, "What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Juliet's argument is that it matters not at all that Romeo is named Montague. But, spoiler alert, plug your ears and hum if you haven't caught the play yet, it actually matters quite a lot. Romeo's Montague name and lineage causes an altercation in which Juliet's firebrand cousin Tybalt kills Romeo's friend Mercutio, which leads to Romeo killing Tybalt, which leads to Romeo being banished, and then secret plans for a reunion of the lovers and sleeping potions and vials of poison and daggers, and Shakespeare frankly told it better, but I don't have time. The whole cheery little romance ends with both title characters untimely dead precisely and unavoidably because of Romeo's name. What's in a name? Something's in a name. It matters. The question's explored more humorously in the old Johnny Cash song, "A Boy Named Sue," written, and for the longest time I didn't know this, by the poet Shel Silverstein. In the song, the boy named Sue laments his unusual name. "Well, my daddy left home when I was 3, and he didn't leave much to mind me, just this old guitar and a bottle of booze. Now, I don't blame him because he run and hid, but the meanest thing that he ever did before he left was he went and named me Sue. Well, he must have thought it was quite a joke, and it got lots of laughs from a lot of folks. And it seems I had to fight my whole life through. Some gal would giggle and I'd get red, and some guy would laugh and I'd bust his head. I tell you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue. Well, I grew up quick and I grew up mean. My fists got hard and my wits got keen. Roamed from town to town to hide my shame. But I made me a vow to the moon and stars I'd search the honky-tonks and bars and kill that man that gave me that awful name." Well, sure enough, the adult Sue, I guess that makes him a man named Sue now, eventually comes across his no-account dad in a honky-tonk bar in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And when they finally meet, the younger man roars out my favorite line from any Johnny Cash song ever, "My name is Sue. How do you do? Now you're gonna die." And they proceed to have the fight to end all fights across the bar and into the street and up and down and all over town until at last the son bests the father and is about to send him on to his reward as penalty for giving him what is, in this case, the terribly inappropriate name of Sue. The father speaks up and he says, "Son, this world is rough, and if a man's going to make it, he's got to be tough, and I knew I wouldn't be there to help you along. So I gave you that name, and I said goodbye. I knew you'd have to get tough or die, and it's that name that helped to make you strong." He said, "Now you've just fought one heck of a fight, and I know you hate me, and you've got the right to kill me now, and I wouldn't blame you if you do. But you ought to thank me before I die for the gravel in your guts and the spit in your eye, because I'm the nut that named you Sue." So there again is the claim that names do matter, and that they shape and they define and they set us on life paths in some quite significant ways. And that has led me to wonder, what does it mean for us as a church that we call ourselves Grace? I mean, if we have a proper understanding of church, we can't just say, I attend Grace Presbyterian Church, or Grace is a place where I sometimes go. If we have a proper understanding of church, we properly say, together we are Grace Presbyterian Church. Together we are Grace. And if being a boy named Sue means you're going to spend your whole life scratching and clawing and spitting and fighting, what does it mean to be a church named Grace? I hope to explore that in a series of sermons over the next several weeks, looking at different aspects of what grace means, or what grace is exactly, or what grace calls us to live out or to live into. I think if your name is Grace, well, that's a pretty strong name that demands some pretty compelling, world-changing things of us. It's unavoidable, because names matter. So, grace. What does it embody? And I'm speaking of the Christian sense of the word, because of course grace can mean an uncommon beauty and elegance, class and refinement, a certain dignity and poise with which one sweeps through the world, but I frankly think we can all look around and agree that that's not the sense of the word that we're talking about here. Grace in a Christian sense has to do with the extravagant, undeserved, unearned, unending love of God. It has to do with God loving the world so deeply and so dearly that God will stop at nothing to show it, no matter what. The no matter what part means, as we know, that in its Christian sense, grace has everything to do with forgiveness. So that's where I want to begin. What's in a name? Grace as extravagant forgiveness. You see, we know a little bit about what forgiveness is, except we don't always really get it to its fullest extent, because true forgiveness is really a lot bigger than we are. Forgiveness, as most people understand it, is sort of a social contract where one person wrongs or hurts another, and some form of apology is offered or some form of restitution is made, and everyone gets a do-over. Say I'm visiting in your home and accidentally break a vase, which is perhaps a favorite vase of yours, and I say, "Oh, I am so sorry." And I express deep remorse, and I offer to pay for the vase or to find some suitable replacement for it. And even though the vase has been damaged beyond repair, you see my genuine regret and that I didn't mean to break it, and maybe you accept my offer of payment, or maybe you don't choose to require it. But in any event, the way the social contract works is that I apologize and offer reasonable redress, and you forgive me, and together we move on. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a process or a negotiation that most of us learn from childhood, and it's frankly how we manage to continue in the world without just all fighting constantly and forever, because hurt feelings and accident and brokenness and harm are a constant part of life. But as I say, that form of forgiveness is predictable, and it's contractual, and it's accepted, and it's even expected. Grace is bigger than that. Grace is forgiveness writ large. It is unexpected, undeserved, unearned, surprising, astonishing forgiveness. Grace goes so far as to tear up the social contract and throw it away. If we look at our scripture lesson closely for this morning, it teaches us something of what our name, grace, lays upon us. Peter comes to Jesus and says, Lord, if my brother or sister, if another member of the body sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And 7, by the way, is not just any number. In the ancient Jewish worldview, 7 was a number of completion or wholeness. God created the world in 7 days, for example. So Peter's expression of willingness to forgive 7 times is reasonable and even generous. But Jesus offers a response that challenges Peter to a forgiveness that is beyond all reason. I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or in some translations, 70 times 7 times. And then Jesus tells the parable from our scripture lesson. The kingdom of heaven, which is Jesus' way for describing God's intent of how things should work on earth, or God's ultimate intent for human relationships, the kingdom of heaven works like this. It may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. And when he began the reckoning, the one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and his children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees before his master and said, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. It's that social contract that we were talking about before. Remember, I owe you, I show remorse, I offer reasonable restitution. But here's the problem. The debt that this servant owes, this is crucial to the parable. The debt that this servant owes far exceeds his reasonable ability to pay it. It exceeds his unreasonable ability to pay it. 10,000 talents. The talent represented 15 years of wages for a laborer. So for the servant to owe the master 10,000 talents, that's 150,000 years of wages. It is an impossible debt. It's an inconceivable debt, but the servant unreasonably asks for time to pay it off. And the presumptive social contract would say, no, you can't possibly pay the debt. You owe your very life and all you possess to the master. The king does an amazing thing. And this is where grace exceeds conventional forgiveness. Conventional forgiveness is reasonable forgiveness. Grace is extravagant forgiveness. The king doesn't give the servant time to repay the debt, as if that's even possible. The king wipes away the debt in its entirety, and it's the sort of action that changes everything. But sadly, for the servant, it seemingly changes nothing. The servant leaves that encounter and he meets a fellow servant who owes him a debt of 100 denarii. Now, a denarius was a day's wage for a laborer. So the fellow servant owes him 100 days of wages. A big enough debt to be sure, but plausibly payable in a year or two. Having just been forgiven a debt covering 150,000 years of wages, the first servant nonetheless demands payment on his colleague's debt of 100 days of wages. And when the second servant offers the same plea that his fellow servant just made to the master, give me time and I will repay it, the difference being that the request is reasonable in this case. The recently forgiven servant does not show grace or gratitude or even mercy, but demands that his debtor be thrown in debtor's prison. And as the master hears of the faithless servant's actions, he rescinds his original offer of forgiveness and restores the full consequences upon the first servant. And what the parable teaches is that radical forgiveness extends the opportunity for life-transforming gratitude, for world-changing gratitude. But if that gratitude is unexpressed or unembodied or unpracticed, then the tree bears no fruit and the world remains unchanged. In short, then, grace is radical, extravagant forgiveness with world-changing expectations and world-altering results. To see the true power of grace in action, or how grace works, or what grace makes possible, we might consider Victor Hugo's famous novel, Les Miserables, which has been rendered in several movies and a Broadway play. And in the book, the main character, Jean Valjean, has been imprisoned for the desperate act of stealing a loaf of bread. That petty crime, plus additional penalties on top of it for attempts at escape, leads to his spending 19 years in prison. At last, he's released, but he finds himself still desperate and destitute with nowhere to go and no one to take him in. So he finally knocks at the door of a kindly bishop who offers shelter for the night and feeds him. And still caught up in his life of desperation and crime, Jean Valjean sneaks away from the bishop's house in the night, carrying with him his precious silver service and silver cutlery of great value. And the police catch him red-handed with all of the stolen plunder, and they bring him back before the bishop. They stand him there and they say, "We have caught this man with all of your silver." And here is where Valjean is placed in the position of the servant with the hopeless debt. He's been caught dead to rights with the bishop's silver. He is certainly headed back to jail and to a life of unending misery as a consequence, but the bishop does an astonishing thing. Instead of offering punishment, he offers grace. He covers for Valjean's sin and offers him opportunity instead of punishment. He claims that the silver can't be stolen because it was in fact a gift. And he chides Valjean that he failed to take also a set of beautiful and expensive silver candlesticks. And the skeptical police go away, and Valjean is left as a free man with unimagined and completely unearned or undeserved wealth. And the bishop's charge is, take this and go, make yourself a new life, an honest life, and a generous life. And the difference between the ungrateful servant and Jean Valjean in the book is that Valjean takes the grace extended to him and in fact builds a new and different and honest life. And the bishop's astonishing, unimaginable gift completely changes the petty thief into an honest man. Grace is an extravagant forgiveness that enables transformation. And if it is received and practiced, it can change everything. Lives and relationships and communities and attitudes and actions. So back to our name. Grace Presbyterian Church. It seems to me that our very name calls us to be a place where an uncommon forgiveness is taught and embodied and modeled and practiced and enabled. Where we learn to recognize our ongoing need to be forgiven, and where we explore our ongoing challenge and our ongoing call to forgive. It means that we hold one another to account for being the type of church and community of faith that lifts such forgiveness to the world. And it also means that where forgiveness is hard or the cost is great, we share as a community in the learning of it and in the labor of it. I think that's important, because the world's not a very forgiving place right now. It's a divided place, an often angry place, a hostile place, a place where violence is answered with violence, and where most people seem bent on looking out for their own self-interest instead of for the common good or for the last or the least. In that world, and to that world, and despite that world, we are invited to offer ourselves, to offer grace, to learn grace, to live grace, to be grace. To have a name like Sue hung upon you as a boy ensures a certain demanding and challenging sort of life. And to have a name like Grace hung on you as a church, that's no easier. It is, in fact, a deeply costly and profoundly countercultural calling. As in both the parable and the Victor Hugo novel, the opportunity for us to extend life-changing, world-transforming forgiveness lies in the realization and the recognition of just what grace we have been offered in our own lives by our abundantly gracious God, and in how we respond. What's in a name? Well, maybe everything. What's our name? Our name is grace. Amen.